Hello, and welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live leadership series, Voices of Leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, your host and founder and CEO of Equals Y. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices from various generations, industries, and backgrounds. It's the team's job to deliver results. It's the role of the leader to empower, inspire, and enable the people in the team to deliver their results. And there's a repeatable formula to this that really drives success. We call it the E3 leadership code: express plus engage plus execute, powered by emotions. However, each leader's approach to applying the leadership code is unique, right? Because there's no one way to lead necessarily. And these live sessions are really meant to highlight other leaders and have them share how they approach leadership. So I am so excited to have you all join us. Please let us know where you're calling in from. Please, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Take this opportunity to network with other people. And now let me get into introducing our guest. Because when we talk about leadership, one of the biggest leadership challenges I see that comes up again and again, no matter the role of the industry, is prioritization. And it's not because leaders don't care. It's quite the opposite, right? It's because everything feels important, urgent, and connected. So I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, who brings a lot of clarity to this real world challenge. I was introduced to Harry Max by a dear friend and partner of Equals Y, Tracy Luring. When Tracy says, "You have to meet this person," I listened, and she told me, "Kath, he gets it. He's one of us." And spot on. So Harry is he's the managing partner of Peak Priorities and the author of Managing Priorities. And he's spent years alongside leaders and organizations to help them turn prioritization into a disciplined international leadership practice. And he really lives in that intersection of decision-making, stakeholder engagement, and execution. And that's where leadership either creates momentum or real friction. So Harry, thank you for joining us. So excited to have you here. I talked about prioritization in your book. Tell us why you really thought about what inspired you to write this book around prioritization.
Well, first off, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm super excited about it, and I've loved our conversation up to this point, and thrilled to see where this thing goes. The genesis of the book was, you know, sometimes when entrepreneurs come to me and they're like, "Hey, should I quit my day job?" And I'm like, "Well, only if you can't not do it." Right? Like, don't go start something unless you can't not do it. It's not like if you must do it. It's worse than that. It's like if you can't not do it. And I was giving a talk at Adobe. It was for the Innovation Games Summit, and the talk was on diagnostic thinking and creative problem solving. And it's related to a talk I gave at South by Southwest and a TEDx talk I did on the same subject. And I noticed something when I was at Adobe. I got through this whole hour-long discussion about how to think about, diagnosing really complicated problems and where to insert interventions to make things better. No one cared, it seemed. But at the very end of the talk, and this is the same talk I gave at USAA, South by Southwest, a number of places, a talk I developed while I was a leader at Rackspace. At the same point in the talk, right when I said, "Does anybody have any questions?" all the hands went up, and the questions were about prioritization, which was just a small piece of the talk. And having a product design and development background, I'm always looking for a demand signal. I'm looking for signals that say there's an unmet or an underserved need here. And so at the same time that I was doing my best to answer those questions, I was trying to pay attention to the fact that they were hungry for some clarity around the topic of prioritization, which I thought was very strange. I figure it's such a fundamental skill. Everybody must know how to do it. I must be the only person who's never read a book on it, right? So I left that talk and I went and did a little research, and I came up with hundreds of books that talk about how important it is, and
Mm,
precisely none that tell you how to do it. And I picked up the phone and I called Lou Rosenfeld, who runs a publishing company, and I was on his strategic advisory board for many years. And I said, Lou, I just had the strangest experience. And I explained to him that I couldn't find any books on prioritization. And he said, that's absurd. There have to be books on this. It is such a fundamental topic. It's a skill as important as rhetoric, right? It is that important. And so he went off and did his investigation. And we got back on the phone a couple of weeks later. And he said, you'll never believe this. You're absolutely right. You have to write the book. So that's where it began.
I love it. And, you know, if you will, so I had the opportunity for those. I think Imelda just put it into the chat, but the book here, and I've been taking a moment this week and reading up on it because I agree with you. Like, I just assumed that everyone knows how to do it, or they look at a certain tool, or you might learn one specific tool, but you really take the full approach from beginning. You're not just talking about one tool, but you look at it and say, okay, let's look at the process and how do we operationalize this in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So if you could, for the audience, can you have a term in there, DEGAP, that I think is extremely powerful. Can you share that with the audience?
Certainly. Yeah. The DEGAP is an acronym, and each of the letters stands for a stage in the process, which I discovered. I didn't invent it. I just discovered as I was researching and labeled each phase in that process. And before I walk you through just a brief of what each phase is, I'll tell you that the gap is trying to get from where you are to where you'd rather be, right? Or where you've come from to a better version of where you are now, to get away from things that you don't want, to go toward things that you do want. And so this idea is crystallized in my mind that to build a bridge is to de-gap the process. Of course, it took a lot of work to explain this to the clothing company, The Gap, when I told them I wanted to when I wanted to trademark this. That took a few years to deal with, but I did ultimately get the registered trademark on it. But the phases are first is decide. Decide if you have time. Decide if it's appropriate. Simple as that, right? A lot of times you just have to act. But I'll tell you, most of the time, people engage in the process of whatever they're doing with a false sense of a false sense of urgency. And if you can slow down just a little bit and be more intentional, it allows you to get a whole lot more clarity about how you're going to achieve better results, and as a result, better outcomes. So the second is engaging in the process. This is where you get traction. So once you've decided to do something, you want to engage in the process. And engaging is really about figuring out where and who are going to where are the sources of information? Where are the sources of potential items you want to prioritize in a context that's relevant? And then once you engage in that process and make the commitment to move the process forward, you talk to those people, you interrogate those information sources, you gather all of that information, the items you might want to prioritize and the information about them. And then you begin the process of arranging them. And by that, it is figuring out whether you're going to use a visual framework like the Eisenhower matrix that everybody knows about, urgency versus important, or whether you're going to use a sorting technique like paired comparison, or whether you're going to use something more sophisticated. And then once you get through that process of kind of cleaning up the items that you have, make sure they're obvious and self-evident, make sure you've deduplicated them, make sure you've picked a tool, then and only then do you engage in the process of actually prioritizing, which is a process of ultimately generating an ordinal list that has the highest priority on one side, usually the top, and the lowest priority on the other. And while this sounds incredibly simple and straightforward, it can be, but oftentimes it is not.
Well, and you talk about degapping, which I think is, I get it, right? Because I often say we're trying to move people from point A to point B, and how do you get there, right? So there's a a bridge that is needed in degapping it. Um, I think some people would hear this and go, wow, yeah, it sounds simple, but yet that's a lot of work to
Mhm.
prioritize. But I think the biggest thing is deciding whether you need to or not. And so
Mhm.
is that your trigger then to decide if you need to DEGAP in reality?
100%, right? Because most of the time, just waking up to the fact that you need to prioritize is almost enough to just quickly run through that process once you understand how it works, because you can do it. It's a little bit like any skill. Once you get to a point that it's automatic, you can do it lightning speed, right? I can set my personal priorities in under 30 seconds at this particular point. It's not doesn't have to be a big bureaucratic thing. It's just that in order to understand what the process is, you have to slow it down. But the execution of that process does not have to be a big, ponderous, long thing.
Right. Because as you mentioned, we are prioritizing all the time, whether we're cognizant of it or not.
That's right.
So, what do you think gets in the way for a lot of people when they think about prioritization? What do you think is the biggest challenge or challenges? I'm guessing there's quite a few. You've done a lot of
Yeah.
research on this.
Well, gee, I'm glad you asked. uh, The first, have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I've heard of it and I wouldn't be able to articulate it at the moment.
That's cool. I mean, it came out of some research by 2 gentlemen. One of them's last name was the other one was Kruger. But it's basically, you know how people who think they're funny aren't really funny? People
Mhm.
who tell you they have good manners probably shouldn't be advertising that, because if they have to tell you they have good manners, they probably don't. Prioritizing is very similar in this regard, which is if you're missing the skill and you're missing the understanding, you probably are not qualified to tell somebody you're good at it. And I think all of us we're all remarkably good at it in very simple environments that are very personal to us. We can do it very quickly and we don't really have to think about it all that much. But the minute we get into an organizational context where we have complex, you know, personal inner dynamics, and we have complex, products and processes and, markets and stakeholders, it gets remarkably complicated. And the understanding at an subconscious or unconscious level how to do it at home when you wake up in the morning and have your coffee is very different from getting together in a room of people that need to be planning for, a $300 million business or whatnot. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that when people develop uh, priorities, they often come up with what I call cartoon priorities, which is they're entertaining, they look great on paper, but when you push on them, they're wafer thin, right? They just don't reveal the level of information that's necessary in order for them to be useful. So without understanding what priorities actually are and and how they're constructed and what the process is, just having something written down is a little bit of a red herring, right? Because it can be a cartoon, it's a caricature of a priority. So you think you have them, but you actually don't. Um, the next thing is what I call the G's drawer of priorities. I don't know if you ever watched uh, Frasier, the movie, the
Mhm.
TV show Frasier with
Yep.
Marty Crane, and he would always go, "Oh, geez," right? And if you have too many priorities, it's like one of those drawers that you open up and it's got all the junk in it, right? And it's just this pile of stuff that's hard to sift through. It's overstuffed. And it's really hard to know what's relevant and what's not relevant because it's poorly organized. It's overstuffed. You haven't taken the cruft out of it. Um, and the last thing is that the learning loop for getting better at prioritization is not really working. And that's because there's a big distance between uh, the process of prioritizing and the outcomes that you get as a result of that. And so it's hard to go back to, gee, I didn't get the result that I want. Did I prioritize very well? Were my priorities well refined? Usually, what happens when somebody doesn't get what they want, a leader doesn't get what they want, a company doesn't get what they want, they go, oh, we had an execution failure or we had a bad strategy. Well, what fed that execution and what fed that strategy? Probably the priorities. And so the process that drives the inputs to your plans and your tools is often just far enough off that it's hard to tack back to look at where the problem actually was. So people don't tend to learn how to do it better.
Yeah, so when you look at it, it's I think I'm hearing a lot of is the clarity, right? Making
Mhm.
sure you know exactly what it is, because you called it the cartoon effect, right? But I think a lot of that is there's no depth to it, as you're
That's right.
saying. And then even the words, and we talked a little bit about this before we came on, is something that means one thing to me might mean very different to you.
Yes.
Right, and then so that's some of making sure that there's clarity there on what are we trying to do. So if you have 5 priorities, and that's what happens, right? Everything's a priority. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Right.
Uh, but that clarity of what exactly is it, and are we trying to accomplish, and why?
And related to that, may I interrupt?
Yes.
Related to that is the mistake that a lot of people make um, that the only type of priorities are work, are to-dos, are activities. But you can prioritize anything. You can prioritize people, processes, symptoms, information. I mean, you can prioritize anything. So if you're only prioritizing work or products or processes or features or to-do lists, you're inadvertently moving so much of what's important out of scope of the process of figuring out what matters most.
And is that one of the reasons then things won't happen because those other priorities weren't named and considered in the process as you're defining what are the priorities?
Uh, Sometimes I think it makes it a lot harder to move faster with clarity and force. But typically, what happens is these different categories of priorities will get surfaced in a company or an organization will get surfaced in different functions, and so there isn't there's a lack of coherency to seeing the whole picture. So it's not often that they don't get done. It's often that they are disaggregated or um, uh, deconstructed and distributed out so that people aren't working off the same sheet of music.
So we might have gone a little bit backwards, and I'm going to bring it forward here. Can you share a really great example of when you've seen prioritization go really well?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I finished a significant uh, coaching consulting engagement last Friday after about a year with a company that I think I can name the company. It's Planet Labs, right? They fly satellites around the world, and I was working with the product and technology, the software team. We were in the process of one leader was retiring, and we had to find a new leader, and we had to get the team moving quickly through that leadership transition. And of course, being a prioritization nerd, right? I kept thinking, why is this environment so challenging, right? I mean, really, very complex, technically technically difficult. I mean, they're just really working hard all the time. And so I had the hypothesis that, well, maybe there was a prioritization challenge. And so I suggested to the president and the CEO that they consider looking into AHP, the analytic hierarchy process, which is a very sophisticated process for prioritizing in an environment like that. Um, and over time, what occurred to me was, oh, they don't actually have a prioritization problem at all, right? They're actually prioritizing really, really well. And in fact, they probably, while they might benefit from AHP, they don't need to go through that process because they're the poster child of actually doing a brilliant job at knowing what's most important through whatever processes and tools they're using. However, the cut line that they use to determine what they're not going to pay attention to wasn't clear. So it wasn't that they were missing what they should be paying attention to. What wasn't as clear as it could have been is what they shouldn't be paying attention to. And while that is technically a prioritization challenge, I did have to admit to myself privately and then to them, sort of more publicly, that they're actually doing prioritization really well. They're getting it right in terms of the hardware they're building, the software they're building, the organizational processes they're running. Are an amazing company, and so there was an example where I think, by hook or by crook, like some of the best companies out there, they figure out how to do it well.
Right. And it is being able to clearly articulate 1, 2, 3, 4. But what I'm hearing you say is being able to say no to the items that aren't above that cut line. And I think that's where a lot of organizations really struggle, right? And
Really
individuals.
struggle. Yeah.
Because do those things that fall beneath the cut line, from your experience, do you find that those are the things people want to do?
Well, there is a whole host of reasons that those things are there, right? Sometimes it's that they want to do them. Sometimes they forgot they were doing them. Sometimes they've become operational processes on things they've already completed and they just haven't made decisions about how they're going to deal with them. Sometimes there are things that they think they need, but they could be spread out in time and deferred. There are many, many, many reasons that things fall below the line. Uh, and I think it really depends on the environment and it depends on the people working on them, how they want to deal with that. Because it's not just that if something falls below the line, you stop it. It's if something falls below the line, perhaps it means that you would like to have more capacity to attend to other things. And therefore, you need a better strategy for dealing with the things that are least important.
Yeah. And when you think about, and I'm going back to the DEGAP again,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of us have a tendency to say, here's my list, here's my 3 things or 5 things or whatever. Don't always take into consider everything. That's the importance of the engage, the gather, and
Arrange.
arrange. Thank you. I keep wanting to say analyze. It's arrange. And looking at that, so you're bringing it holistically, right? And that's the intentionality of doing this, rather than just saying, how am I going to prioritize?
That's right. And if the book is about one thing, it's about being intentional.
And how do you recommend people become more intentional in what they do? Where does it start for them?
Boy, is that a good question. Uh, I think the beginning of that is to ask them whether they want to get better results. And if the answer is yes, then the first place, the first way station is to ask yourself, you know, do I have time to prioritize prioritization? And if I can make that a practice, then I can improve the situation for myself first. I can participate with my team in a more productive, more effective fashion. And ultimately, we can lead the organization in a better way, right? There's a string that goes from priorities to uh, decisions and plans to results to outcomes. And so if you look at that and you say, okay, are the outcomes not what we want? Are the results not as we expect? Are the decisions or plans not as clear, not as decisive? Are the activities not what we're enjoying or not what we're good at, right? You can look at this whole thing and just ask yourself, is there a gap between what we want and what we have?
Yeah, it's interesting how I think you approach it, and I think we're very aligned, but you tend to come from it at the end back. And I often start from, what would you love? Where are we trying to get to? What do we need to do? And make sure there's the why. And I know that's all important to you as well. And bringing it forward. And that prioritization, I look at, is around that execution, to make sure that what you're trying to accomplish is going to actually happen, right?
That's right.
And then, when you bring in the engage, I hear you talking about who else needs to be part of it. Because how much do we break down in prioritization because not everyone's on board, not everyone understands what those priorities are.
Yeah, that's right. And you really can come at this from either direction. All I'm saying, to answer your question directly, is where do you start? You ask yourself, is there a gap between what you're getting and what you want?
Yep.
And if that's true, sure, you can go back to the purpose of what you're doing and whether you love what you're doing. I mean, you can step out of the frame and look at it from that direction, or you could look at it through the lens of prioritization.
Yep. And when you think about all this, how do you coach someone that will say to you, we don't prioritize as a business? What's the first thing you would recommend a business to think about if it's an individual saying, oh, our priorities are all over the place?
Mm. Yeah, I asked them if they have any concerns whatsoever about the competition, and who their competition is and how capable they are, and ask them, well, if your competition got really good at figuring out what mattered most and could start executing decisively and getting significantly better, more predictable, more consistent results, would that be a concern to you?
Yeah.
The answer is always yes. And then the question is, well, do you have any deep interest in doing anything about it? And if so, is it a people problem? Is it a process problem? Is it a technology problem, or all of the above? And
All right. So we have a question coming in from Ralph, and I love this question. How do you say no? Because it feels like that word is loaded with emotion and fear. And I think with prioritization, you do have to say no to things, right? So he's asking, do you have any tips on how to get over those feelings and see things from a better perspective?
uh, I cheat a little bit here, which is that I read a brilliant book by a fellow by the name of William Ury, I believe is the author, and it's called The Power of Positive No. And this is a book I actually recommended to Tracy Loring many, many years ago. And it's a set of techniques for saying no to the thing, but saying yes to the context or what was even more important.
Hmm.
And so it's being clear about what you're saying no to, and uh, and then framing that in terms of how that no would help whoever it is making that request really get what's more important to them and to you. That's part of the cheat. The other part of the cheat is, and this is a little embarrassing. So early in my career, I had a mentor who said to me, "You know what your problem is?" I said, "I don't have a clue. It's why I'm asking." And he said, "You don't know how to say no." And I said, "Well, when I say no, people get mad at me." And he said, "I want you to go away and come back with 100 different ways to say no." And as exercise, so I had a week to go come up with 100 different ways. And I came back with this list. And then he said, "I want you to pick the three that you're most comfortable with." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And now when I get into a situation and somebody says, "I want you to do this thing," or "I need this other thing," or whatever it is, and I know the answer is no, I don't actually use the word no. I use "it's not possible." I have to commit to getting back to you on this, to figure out what's at stake. Um, let's look into this. Uh, there are going to be some implications that are going to shift our priorities, and I'd like to be clear about what those are. Or I negotiate on the spot, but I don't say no anymore.
Hmm.
Usually it ends up being a prioritization discussion. If we add this thing in, what we're doing is we're consuming capacity to accomplish these things we've already agreed are really important. And what happens is, if we say yes, we are either going to be burning these people out, or we are going to be potentially reducing the quality, or we'll be consuming the capacity that we have for an unexpected problem if it comes in. Like, there's a lot of ways to deal with this, but it started with that book.
That's a great answer. I think, and you said it really, I think it's really important. It's the negotiation,
Mhm.
right? And it's the conversation of having clarity on what the request is, knowing what else exists on the plate, right? And we have all these other things. Are we in agreement? All these other things are important too. And then saying, okay, what's going to be a win-win for everyone in this scenario, as you
And you,
talked about?
yeah, and you made a really good distinction right there too, which I failed to make, which is it's not a transaction. It is a conversation, and that conversation is a negotiation in this particular regard. If you look at it as a transaction, you've already lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about what I say and what I think on one thing, and you have the conversation and you think, oh, what they're asking for, no way, I can't do it, not going to happen, I don't have the time. We bring our own fears, uncertainty, and doubt into these kind of conversations.
Mhm.
But when you ask for that clarity, like, well, what exactly is it that you're looking for? Why is it? It just does help go, oh, wait a minute, we actually are trying to do the same thing. We're good. We're already doing it, right? Have you ever found that someone asks for something and it sounds initially different than the priority and you realize that it's already on the list?
100%. Yeah, either it's already activity that's started, or that it's something that's already been prioritized, and maybe they're asking for something they don't know it's been prioritized, and so it may be a question of increasing the priority level, and making some trade-offs with other things.
Yeah, and when I've been reading your book, and again, we're so similar in how we think, it really comes down to thinking through all these things and having clear conversations to be able to drive the results and agreements that we're trying to build from.
Yeah, and very much to the to the approach that you have. It's about expressing, it's about engaging, and it's about executing on that. You bring these things together and you start to have a clarity engine that's driving results.
Yeah. And another point you made in the book, which I like, is this is not a one-time exercise,
Mm-mm.
right? And priorities from today versus tomorrow could be very different, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And so I distinguish between episodic prioritization, which is a one-off or extremely infrequent thing, like going to a school or changing a job, from periodic prioritization, like product planning or operational planning, from continuous prioritization. And that's just refining it all the time. But the process itself really is a very kind of macro level continuous process.
And if you had advice for leaders today and you were wishing them would to embrace one thing in particular when it comes to prioritization, what would it be?
Oh, geez. We talked about this and I probably gave you a great answer. And now I'm all,
It's all about awareness.
it is definitely all about awareness, no question about it. Yeah, I think the thing that I come back to over and over and over with senior leaders is they have to attend to what they're avoiding, and they have, because the enemy is self-deception,
Mm,
and the enemy is deceiving ourselves into thinking about what should be true when in fact it is not. And by attending to what we're avoiding, whether it's a feeling or whether it's something a conversation we need to have, sometimes with ourselves, sometimes with somebody else, whether it's a decision we need to make or whether it's an activity we need to engage in, getting clear about what we're avoiding and then prioritizing that and taking action on it is that is the single most important takeaway.
and that is a really big point that a lot of leaders just think they need to push through. Like, command and control. We're just going to do it. This is what needs to get done. But what you're talking about is having that emotional intelligence to know how you're showing up, how you work, how you think about all of this so that you can make sure you do prioritize the right things.
Yeah, otherwise, you end up falling prey to the unintended negative consequences of your potentially ill-advised actions. And I think one of my favorite chapters in a book that I just love was by Jim Collins, the book Great by Choice. And the last chapter in that book is on luck, the return on luck. And he said the great companies take advantage of good luck, and the companies that they don't fall prey to bad luck. And the companies that are not as successful tend to miss the opportunities for good luck and tend to fall prey to the bad luck. And I think so much of that's about clarity and about understanding what your priorities are. And that to me comes back um, to kind of this emotional self-insight around what it is you're avoiding.
Yeah. It, my father used to, I used to say to my father, "Oh, I've been very lucky." And
Mm.
he would come back and he goes, "You haven't been lucky. You set yourself up for that success."
Yeah.
And it is about doing the introspection, right? Work of being aware, of having the operational rigor. And that's what you bring to the table, which I really appreciate around prioritization. It isn't luck that you're going to get it right. It takes effort, it takes intentionality, and you can get good at it. And that's the part that's an amazing takeaway, is you can master this and get good at it.
Yeah, and frankly, it's not that hard. If you start with yourself and you don't worry about all the other stuff, it's not that hard. It's knowing what the steps are, and it's having some kind of reasonably regular practice.
Yes. And you're the expert on it, so you can say it's not hard, but it does take work, and it takes that time to learn those habits and practice it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of tying your shoe, learning to tie your shoe, right? Learning to tie your shoe is hard, and but doing it's easy. Well, actually, it's not the opposite. It's exactly like it. It's learning it is a little bit hard, but then doing it is profoundly easy
Hmm.
versus something that is easy to learn but hard to do. This is the opposite of that.
Right, but it is, but it's hard to remember sometimes. Like, with I say this on with leadership all the time. We all know as leaders we should be grateful and show gratitude to our people, but we forget,
Yeah.
right? We forget the basics of how to good prioritization looks like. Not hard, not complex. Well, no, I like to say it's not complex,
Hmm.
right? It's simple in how, but it can be hard to implement it
True.
sometimes.
True. And especially as you get closer to large episodic situations where you have, for example, annual or strategic prioritization that's going to feed your financial or annual planning, that's it's challenging, right? It is not easy to do well. And it requires more than just having one person with some knowledge and a commitment to do it.
Yeah. Well, Harry, I mean, I could talk to you all day about this, and I know Tracy would be loving to jump in as well. But I am so appreciative to Tracy for introducing us. I am so looking forward to our continued dialogues about this, because when you find people that are aligned in your thinking, right, we can continue to help others find their way and have a better work environment where people are working on the right things at the right time and accomplishing their goals and having great outcomes.
And having
So
more fun.
I love it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I call it the virtuous cycle. You get this right, it just keeps
Yeah.
rolling in a good direction. And that's what we're here to do, is deliver results but have fun at the same time.
Yep.
So, Harry, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. You're actually wrapping up our 2025 series of Voices of Leadership.
Mhm.
And we appreciate everyone that's joining us today. Again, if you want to learn more about prioritization from Harry, please go out and grab his book. Like I said, I have mine and I'm enjoying reading it. There's so much goodness in it. And we look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Hope you have a great holiday season, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.